Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we typically kick off lunch break where Mishti and I are reading Twitter or doing something. Sometimes we have featured guests like you are today. But Mishti is absent because we had a special one-off session that we just did in the last hour.
Nice.
So she will come join us as soon as she wraps that up. I was just on that and came over to make sure that we didn't leave you hanging.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And here's Mishti. So welcome, Mishti.
Hi, Mishti.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I hear you're a fellow tiger. I saw that.
Oh, yeah. Are you a Princeton grad? Yeah. Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did I mention that or no?
I think you did. Yeah.
Or no, I mentioned about Dan.
Oh, is he also? Wow. I guess we're everywhere.
Yeah, I like it.
It's funny.
So, let's see. Sameer, the other day you sent me an email and connected me to Arib, who I got a chance to chat with yesterday.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
He's awesome. Thank you for the intro. That was super great.
I'm glad.
I invited him to come on, so we'll invite him for a lunch break and we can talk about recycling stuff.
Nice. Okay, I'll have to join in for that one.
Yeah, he's cool. It sounds like you guys met a while back.
Yeah, I've known each other for a little bit.
It's cool.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Good guy, like working on a super interesting and important problem. So yeah, totally. Happy to have smart people thinking about sustainability.
Yeah, and then last time we hung out, well, I guess it was virtual hangout, was at your birthday when we played games.
Yeah, that was super fun.
I forget if I told you that inspired Jen to host that same kind of session with her community.
I was happy to hear that, and yeah, all the credit goes to my wife. I was merely a surprised participant. I don't know if I told you, but she told me I was joining a work holiday party or something. So too bad we didn't have that recorded. But I feel like you can see my mind slowly process. Like, wait a minute, I know that person and that person and that person. Like, what is going on? Why are they all at their work holiday party?
Right. And that was also where I hadn't also seen Brian in a while, and so I got to bump into Brian again, and we reference his writing all the time.
Oh, nice.
On lunch break. So this is Brian Christian.
Awesome.
Oh, the Brian. Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
That's actually how I met Brian, was through Sameer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. We were just talking to him.
I appreciate the Brian. I met Brian when he was like 14 years old. So to me, he's just Brian, but he's become the Brian now. So yeah, he's a super interesting and impressive person.
Yeah. We're always quoting something from Algorithms to Live By. Like,
nice.
Talk about the explore exploit problem. Actually, our last session, we were talking explore exploit and the secretary problem.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Very cool. Well, you'll have to have Brian on here at some point as well.
Yes, we'd love to. Actually, you know what? I think I was missing maybe his most up to date email address. So maybe you can send me his email address, and we can. Because I was looking through and I wasn't sure if I had it. I was going to write to him to do that, because I know he was saying that his newest book promo kind of collided with the launch of the book collided with the U.S. elections, and I think he hasn't
happening.
Told all the story the way he wants to. So let's make more forums.
I would say those are the two major events of 2020.
That was kind of what happened,
and the presidential election. Yes, I don't really remember anything else from last year.
Right.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me. Was that we were at? Was it Nopalito? Was it the last time I saw you
live in person in real life? Yeah, I forget exactly where we were. Sounds familiar.
So you had a party at Nopalito?
Yeah.
That correctly?
Okay, that's right. Yeah, no, it's coming.
Was that a surprise birthday the year before the virtual one?
That was, I believe, a baby shower for my wife. Maybe I think that was Nopalito. She's gonna watch this and I'm gonna be embarrassed because I should know where it was.
I raced it and didn't remember what we were celebrating. I think you're right. You're right. It was.
Yes, I can tell you exactly when that was. December 2019, when we were all, I guess, naively not knowing what we were about to go into.
COVID-19 had existed because it was December 19.
Yeah,
COVID-19.
Yeah, actually, at Cambly we had a global summit where we brought the entire company from all over the world to San Francisco. And we did that in November of 2019, and so it couldn't have been timed better. We had no idea what the world was going to look like a couple months from then. So we did that just in time as well.
Yeah. So actually, now that I'm thinking about when I last saw you in the flesh, now that we're thinking of San Francisco restaurants and actually seeing each other in person, Jen and I were eating at India Oven.
Yeah, my old neighborhood.
and you stumbled in. It sounds like you were drunk or something. You weren't drunk. When was that? Was that before even? That was further back?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, because we sat down and grabbed dinner with you guys back then, right?
That was fun. Yeah,
I like
it's
that.
Like
that's
those kinds of impromptu things.
Yeah, not a thing that happens in like today's world, right? Like, hey, we're gonna grab dinner.
Trying to walk for a year out.
yeah, exactly. That's our local neighborhood spot. I forget what we were there for, but I might have been grabbing some, rice or naan or something like that, and been like, oh, hey, look who's here. We decided to stick around and stay. So that was super fun. Yeah, we need more times like that happening in real life.
I'm looking forward to it. More serendipitous bumping into friends and stuff. So you mentioned Cambly, so let's catch up a little bit.
Yes.
I think actually a lot of people, I don't even know that I've told Mishti all of what Cambly is all about.
I was looking at it earlier today, super into it. I mean, I love
it. Sounds like you should pitch it, huh? If you haven't told her yet about it, I'll put her on the spot.
Let me try. Yeah, let me try. So let me try. So Cambly is a real-time live English language practice experience.
Yep.
How about that?
Perfect. Over video chat. So you open our app, you press a button, and within a few seconds we connect you to a native English speaker over video chat. And we've got customers all over the world who are using Cambly to basically practice their conversational English. Very much a big global problem in the world. There are 6 billion people in the world who don't speak English, and so that's a lot of people. And then 1.5 billion of those people are actively trying to learn English right now. And so it's interesting. It's a problem that we don't see every day because the people we know speak English, but and so it sort of gives you this false impression that it may not be a big problem in the world. Like, I don't have that problem. You don't have that problem. But it turns out 6 billion people in the world do have that problem, and so it's a deceptively large problem that I think a lot of folks aren't thinking about or focused on. I think a really important one to solve. And so we've been at it for a little while, working on helping people develop a really important skill.
And when people want to learn English, out of, I guess, 6 billion people who you're saying would want to learn or improve their English skills, does it kind of categorize into certain, like, are there certain obvious categories like professional development, social relationships, other, what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, like, to think about, any of us learning a foreign language and what that might look like. And then I think it's often a pretty different case for learning English. English is a unique language. It's something that if you don't know English and you learn English, it will, like, fundamentally change your life. Like, it really unlocks opportunities you would have never had exposure to before. And so, some examples of that are, like, you take two people that have the exact same skills except one speaks English and the other doesn't. The person who speaks English gets paid on average 30 to 50% more than the one who doesn't. And so, from a professional standpoint, being able to speak English really opens a lot of doors. If you think about, like, the world's information, the internet, most of it is in English, and it's something like we don't think about every day because that works out for us. It's convenient for us. But if you don't know English, it like dramatically reduces the scope of information you have access to. It's a big challenge in many parts of the world. And so that's something, we're excited and sort of excited to help out with. I think the way we think about it is like, there's sort of two different worlds. Like there's the English speaking world and then there's a non-English speaking world. And if you know English, you're limited really only by your own sort of talent and skills. But if you don't know English, you're often limited to your local economy, which could be good, but could also not be that big. And if you want to sort of participate in the global economy where international business trade, like everyone does that in English. And so if you want to participate in that, you just have to know English. And so it's just a really important, like, sort of fundamental skill that people value a lot for good reason.
But when you see the stats, like, did you quote was it 35 to 50% increase?
30 to 50% increase in salary. So we have a lot of professionals on our platform who are learning English because they can get a better job or a raise. And
is that some mix of, like, are there certain categories, like would maybe customer service on the phone would be like really important? Is it kind of a certain type of white collar virtual type of work?
Yeah, it's across the board. I mean, I think like the service industry is a big one, right? Like if you're interacting with other people, like learning English is obviously a really important skill. Customer support, as you mentioned, also a big category. But it's so much broader than that. Like, I think if you think about just globalization in general, it's just like super powerful force that's changing the way the world operates. There's a lot of good that's coming out of that. But if you want to be a part of that, you have to know English, right? Like if you look at any sort of big international company, a lot of those companies operate in English, and so you just can't get a job at an international company if you don't know English. And so, a couple examples categories we've seen in customers we've met through our platform. A medical professional who wants to move to the U.S., who learned English on Cambly, and then was able to become, get a job here in the U.S. We have a software engineer who is contracting and can work is a Russian software engineer, and he can work with clients in Russia just fine as long as he communicates in Russia. But as soon as he learns English, all of a sudden now he can work with anyone anywhere in the world, right? It's a really kind of prime example, I think, of the type of opportunity that's unlocked. Pilots is another super interesting one, which we had all these pilots show up on Cambly, and we were kind of surprised about, like, why are pilots using Cambly? And as we dug into it, what we learned is, if you're a Turkish pilot and you only know Turkish, you can fly anywhere you want in Turkey. But if you want to fly internationally, the official language of air traffic control is English. And so you can't fly any international routes unless you know English. And so it's this thing where, like, if you could just learn English dangling right there in front of you, you can get the promotion, you can start flying internationally. And that's a handful of examples, but there are examples like that all over the place. When you start to look, you kind of see the opportunities that English opens up.
Totally. And I'm curious about how Cambly evolved, because in the beginning I love just like the simplicity of it, kind of like click in and be on a video chat with someone, right? Yeah. But then you must have, there's so many layers that you could add on, that you probably have added on, and I wonder how you've thought about the evolution of, like, what more do you offer people in terms of their language learning, or is it for like enterprises and schools, and what are you thinking about now? Or is it more like, let's stick to this very streamlined, easy, like obvious thing that people need when they're learning a language?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and lots to say there. I think, like, for starters, I think the product has stayed surprisingly true to the sort of its original form, and DK and I are really close, and so he's been following and been a big support of our journey all along the way.
I'll say it's so simple. I was skeptical that it would work.
Yeah,
I was a bigger fan of Sameer and Kevin than I was of this product.
Yeah. So for context, my co-founder's name is Kevin, and Kevin and I worked with DK before starting Cambly, and as I like to say, we learned. I learned everything I know about startups from DK, and so yeah, owe him big time. But yeah, when we were getting started, he was a big supporter and gave us a lot of really good advice, kind of as we were getting Cambly off the ground. The earliest version of Cambly was very humble beginnings. Kevin and I were the only two tutors, and we basically spent our day writing code and building the product. We have both software engineering backgrounds. Writing code and building the product, and then talking to customers. Yeah. And it was kind of cool because we wanted to obviously talk to customers to learn about what their needs were and how we could help make the product better. Yeah. They wanted to use our product because they wanted to talk to native English speakers, and we happen to be native English speakers, so it was actually a very symbiotic relationship. And it was a great way to get started and kind of really understand the problem. Lots of things we figured out kind of early on. For starters, Kevin and I weren't necessarily the best tutors, and we also kind of were trying to work on building the product and the business, and so we couldn't kind of be there 24/7 available on demand, especially we both lived in San Francisco. We slept roughly the same hours, and so when we went to sleep, Cambly didn't work. So that was very humble beginnings. We started to build out a tutor community, and hired people, brought people on the platform that were much better tutors than we were, and got to kind of focus on continuing to build out the product. The earliest version of the app, it really literally was just the button. You press it and instantly you get someone. And even kind of before we raised any money, we had an app that worked you could press that button 24/7 and you get a native English speaker within a few seconds. We quickly realized, kind of observing behavior, that kind of rolling the dice and getting a random tutor every time isn't necessarily what customers want. And we would see interesting behaviors where customers would call in over and over again until they got the tutor they actually wanted to talk to. And so obviously people build actually meaningful relationships on the platform. They talk one-on-one with them, many times a week, sometimes every day. And so one of the early features we built was we should make tutor discovery better. At least you should be able to see who's available and look at their profiles and learn more about them before you decide who to talk to. And that was obviously in the very nascent stages back then, but it's evolved a lot over the years. And I think it's one of the big strengths of the platform that we've sort of built out a community of a very, very diverse community of tutors. And it's something I think that was unobvious to many at the start, that what people wanted wasn't necessarily a professional teacher and a highly structured lesson, and definitely not a one-size-fits-all experience. What people wanted was a regular person who they enjoyed talking to, had some shared interests with. From a professional standpoint, having the same profession as you is actually huge, right? So if you're that pilot trying to learn English, you don't want to just learn everyday English. You don't want to just be able to order food at a restaurant like you would from you'd learn from a travel guide or something like that. What you want to learn is I want to be able to talk to air traffic control in English, and that's a very specific language that actually probably none of the three of us even know. And so if you can talk to someone who has aviation experience, they're going to be able to zoom in right on that material that's really really important for you to learn. And that's something I think that we've sort of just naturally, as the marketplace of sort of students and tutors has grown, we just are operating at a much bigger scale than we were in the early days, and so that lends itself to us being able to find you a much better tutor and a much better match. And I think the very first version of Cambly, we said we'll get you a friendly native English speaker instantly, and that was kind of the value proposition. But the vision was always we're not just going to get you a friendly native English speaker, we're going to get you the perfect person for you. And I think we were able to, we still have a ways to go, but we were able to fulfill on that vision a lot better than we were, several years ago when we started.
That's really cool. Yeah, one thing that's kind of striking is I'm sure as a founder, like you must have had so many kind of paths in the road where you were like, should we also do this or should we also do this? And like how basically like the decision making of how you decide whether something is truly like a value add and would meaningfully augment the original vision, like while sticking to the simplicity.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I mean, there's so many language learning things out there and they all approach things super differently, and like you could just have made this like mess monster conglomeration of things. So do you, like, how have you approached that decision making over time, and like do you remember any points in the road where you were really like deciding whether to, you know, go one way or the other?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, focus has been like a big focus for us, if you will. Like, you know, we've stayed really focused, and I think we've benefited a lot from it. I mean, you're right. There are a million forks in the road where you can stray from that that sort of original product or that original kind of value proposition. And yeah, then there's a fair share of language learning services out there that we've seen that kind of try everything, try to be everything. And yeah, very deliberately did not do that. Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples, but like, you know, I think what we identified is what we believe is like a big hole in the language learning process. You know, there are a lot of ways to like get started, to learn your first few words of a language. Lots of apps out there, lots of services. You know, what we found where there's a big gap is if you want to go from some like basic fundamental level of a language to fluency, and ultimately, like if you want to be able to speak a language, you have to speak it. Like there's no way around that, and it feels almost funny to say that out loud because it feels like a tautology, like it feels really obvious, but you'd be surprised at how much that, like, you know, you look at all those other solutions out there, and you'd be surprised at how much they miss that, right? Like, and you know, I always kind of like to describe like analogies, like athletic analogies. I feel like are interesting. Like, you know, it's, you know, I'm a big skier, as DK knows, and like the idea that you would like buy the top rated how to ski book on Amazon, and then like read it cover to cover, and then go to the top of the mountain and be like, cool, I'm ready to ski. Like it's such an absurd idea, right? But that's actually how people approach language learning, right? Like they study from a book for years, and then you know, move to the US and test and get a great test score on their English exam, and then, you know, move to the US and expect they're going to be able to hit the ground running, and they can't, right? They've never exercised that skill. And so that's kind of what Cambly's been all about, is like filling in that kind of hole in the market. And yeah, I mean, we are growing to be kind of the solution for every stage of language learning. We're adding more structure. We have a curriculum now, but we kind of zoomed in on this, I think, this really important stage in the language learning process. And by the way, it's worth mentioning that like going from zero English to like some basic understanding of English, like you don't really unlock that economic opportunity that we were talking about before. Like you need to get to a certain level. Like the value add to your life really happens at that stage where you go from like, you know, some you know, intermediate level of a language to actual fluency. Like, can you operate with this language in a job, right? And that's a high ask, right? And so that's actually where a lot of that unlock happens, and that's where Cambly kind of really fills in what we see as sort of a hole in the market.
So something you just mentioned, you know, makes me curious because you mentioned the word curriculum, and I know that it was a constant debate from early on how much of that you wanted to do, and I think you were very committed to just getting the people connection, which is very challenging, but you did figure out how to get that to work, and you were, you know, I think getting people connected just to practice seems like, you know, it unlocks tons of flexibility, but now it sounds like you're figuring out places where curriculum can fit in. So I wonder if you could help us understand, like, is that one part of the journey from 0 to 10%, or from 10% to 80% fluency, or how does it, where does that fit into the overall puzzle?
No, totally. Yeah, it's kind of related to Mishti, your question about like focus as well. Like, we were really focused on delivering this one specific type of interaction for years, and like DK said, like we got the product working pretty well, and grew a healthy business through that. And I think what's helped, I think, with the focus side of things is like, what I find really helpful is like we have this single like sort of problem and mission that we're trying to solve, and we're excited to use technology to help solve it. But I feel like in a lot of the ways you could get distracted, like that brings a lot of focus to what we're doing. And so we want to bring high quality English education to every English learner in the world. And so I think having like a problem that we are trying to solve, I think makes it easier in my mind than like, if we were building an app where we were just trying to get traction, we didn't really care what problem it was solving. You could bounce around, I think, a lot more. But because we've got this singular problem that we're focused on, it's I think really helped us kind of keep our eye on the ball there. Curriculum is an interesting one. Like we had done kind of sort of various lightweight passes on curriculum over the years. We eventually kind of really invested in it when we built out our kids product, and so we have a kids product as well now, and that's been going really well, and it's been really successful business for us as well, and I think kind of coming back to like some of the impact we can have, like catching people earlier in their life, like that just means that all of the opportunities available to you through English, like you just have them now for a longer, a bigger part of your life. And obviously like kids are good at picking up languages as well. And so you can teach them faster and more effectively, and it can enable them for a bigger part of their life. And so the impact of that is really powerful.
Is curriculum mostly tied to the kids product, or it's across?
So we initially built it out for the kids product because, having a more visual thing, like you can imagine, it's hard to keep a 6-year-old engaged. And so we built out our curriculum for the kids product initially. And now we've brought it over to the adult product as well. Coming out to that vision around like getting you the perfect tutor, I think like, the way I would think about it is like, imagine like the perfect educational experience for you. Like, what is the best way for you to learn anything? And I think if you think about that, like that, I feel like some company, maybe it was Airbnb, who talked about like the 5-star experience, the 6-star experience, the 7-star experience, right? Like if you think about that in our space, like when I think about that, I think about like, well, match me with the perfect tutor for me, like one-on-one, and give me the perfect content to talk about. And ideally, if in order to learn as fast as possible, you want to be sort of on the sort of like fringe of your knowledge, like at all times, and just hang out there and just constantly pushing that envelope. And I think there's a lot there. I think, thinking about the perfect tutor, thinking about the perfect content and curriculum, like building out like a business English course, or like, a marketing English course, or like, different, a pilot's English course, right? Like those allow us, I think, to like make sure that we're leveraging the time you have with that tutor one-on-one as much as possible. And I think one-on-one is really interesting as well, because, it's sort of almost by definition going to be personalized, right? Because you've got someone there dedicated to listen to you and to work with you to make sure you're kind of right at the edge of your education. And so there's that combination is just super powerful. And if you think about, I reflect on the times in my life where I learned something new the fastest, and it's often like talking with someone one-on-one who's much more experienced in that topic than I am, and then I can just hang out of like, well, I get this part, but I don't get this, and you don't waste time kind of with any sort of one-size-fits-all educational experience.
Yeah.
Right. And do people collaborate I know that video chat is kind of the core mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Are people using video in interesting ways to kind of do collaboration, or to sort of to maybe read something together, to watch or like look at a diagram together? Is that an important part of it, or is it just a human connection thing? Or?
No, video's powerful. Like, I mean, there's obviously the human connection side. Like, like people build really meaningful relationships on the platform, and and I think the relationships are really interesting because they're people from opposite sides of the world, very different cultures, very different languages. Yeah, so I can come back to that in a sec. But I think so. The video, I think, helps with that. people do screen share and things like that. But I mean, there's other really cool stuff that happens on the platform. Like, I'm reminded of like a young girl who was learning on Cambly, who her tutor basically decided to do like kind of an impromptu like cooking lesson with her, and they basically like made like blueberry muffins together.
Oh wow!
It's such an engaging experience, right? Talk about keeping the attention of a young kid, like such a fun and interesting and engaging experience for them. And that's something that like, can only be powered by a video experience. And so there's a lot of really cool, like stories and nuggets like that happen on the platform every day.
Yeah. Can we hear about some of those? I mean, I'm so curious because I remember when I was a kid, my mom used to Skype this man in Hong Kong who was a friend of a friend of a friend, and it was exactly for this purpose. And they like developed this really interesting friendship and like learned so much from each other just because she was helping him practice his English. And I think about like these communities of pilots or, other kind of subcultures that you're seeing emerging on Cambly. Like what kind of relationships have been popping up that have been like surprising to you?
Yeah, no, it's super cool. I think, you mentioned the sort of cultural exchange side, like, definitely wasn't like the mission and the goal of Cambly when we started it, but like we were pretty aware that we were creating something, pretty unique and special in that regard. Like, all the time that people spend on Cambly, they're talking to someone who's like very different from them, has a very different life, grew up in a very different place, very different culture. And so, part of what our students are excited about is they're not just learning English, but they're learning about like, American culture or, British culture or whatever, right? Like if you're gonna move to one of those countries, like what better way to kind of hit the ground running, right? Like to be talking to folks from there all the time and be practicing your English, but also learning about, you can imagine moving to another country is a big culture shock. And, why not start ramping up a few months early through a platform like Cambly? But I think that what's interesting is the learning is definitely goes in both directions, right? Like the tutors, being a tutor in Cambly is like a super cool job, right? Like you get to work from home, kind of any hours you want, totally flexible, and you get to talk to interesting people around the world, and you get paid for it. It's a pretty cool job, and if you like traveling, it feels a lot like traveling. You can talk to a student in Brazil and Japan and Saudi Arabia in an afternoon, and it almost feels like you just visited those three places, and so it's really cool that way. And so there's a lot of
the internet.
What's that?
It's like finding a hostel on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. I like that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of cultural learning on the other side as well. And so, we have a pretty big business in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and the kind of the surrounding region. And so like a good chunk of time on Cambly, is spent with American tutors talking to people in the Middle East. And like, obviously that's like, you have a pretty limited scope of exposure to that culture. Generally, like you have kind of what the media tells you, but then you have this very different experience through Cambly where, you talk to these folks and you're like, they're kind of just like me. You talk about the movies they like and, their life is maybe not as different as you thought. And it's just, it like kind of skips all of the sort of the messengers in the process and goes straight from like person to person. And it's really, there's really cool stuff that happens as a result of that.
Yeah, it's nice that Cambly kind of provides a context, which is like, we're here to learn and exchange in this way, but then it doesn't necessarily prescribe too much of what you should do. So it both creates context, but then leaves it open. It's a very nice balance there versus if, kind of you take the extreme, like non-context example of like a chat roulette, you don't really know like where to get started or what to do. This is like perfect context, real relationships, and then you expect to continue that on, but enough openness that you're open to kind of serendipity.
Exactly.
One thing that I know we had talked about before, and I don't know the state of it, but I'm intrigued to hear kind of how the thinking has evolved. Is certainly like one-on-one has a place, and it's probably a very substantial way to do kind of that educational process. And I thought there was some exploration or discussion before about doing some sort of small group participation thing. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, sort of, have you gotten deeper there? What have you learned? Is that part of the core product? Have you sort of decided to not go there? How does that work?
So today it's not, but it's something that we're like pretty interested in. I think the biggest motivation for that is, our mission is to bring high quality English education to every English learner in the world. There are a lot of them in the world, and Cambly today is a pretty expensive product. You're paying for often an American's time one-on-one, and Americans are expensive, and so we're aware that we as a company I would love to charge much less for Cambly and provide the service. Like we're just a very impact driven company. That's kind of what motivates us and keeps us going. And we care about the impact more than anything. And so I'd love it if we could make Cambly a tenth the price, but we can't because we have to pay our tutors, and we care a lot about paying our tutors well as well, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you fix that? And I think the tutors are like the magic of Cambly, right? So like you don't want to get rid of that, right? Like that's the core of the product, and that's what makes it so special. But how do you bring the cost down? And there's limited ways to do that. And I think one of the more obvious ways is, well, what if a single tutor could help a few students instead? And it's a delicate balance because like in the limit, if there's 100 students, then like is it any different from watching like a YouTube video, right? Like right. And interacting, like you actually speaking, is very core to the experience. And so mm-hmm. But I think there's something really interesting there. Like if we can basically find the right balance there, but bring down the cost, especially if you can we talked about matching the perfect tutor for you. What if there's a student just like you in Brazil and another one just like you in Saudi Arabia, yeah. and we can get you all together learning about right. English for pilots at the same time, right? Like as you think about that from like a marketplace perspective, there's kind of a complex dimensionality component of that where like it takes a lot of scale to be able to do that really well, but that is kind of what we've been doing is building a lot of scale. And so I think it's something you can deliver like, at larger and larger scale, you can deliver a better and better experience on that. And so, again, motivation is like, how do we make Cambly like more accessible to more people? And that's super important for us. And I think ways we can do that where the experience is, just as good or almost as good as it was one-on-one, I think is really interesting. And I say just as good or, potentially even better because there are some really real benefits of having other students in there. Like it's motivating to be in a group where other people are learning like you are. There's a really cool social aspect of that as well, like sort of international classroom. You can build strong connections in that way as well. And I think it helps to obviously it helps to talk to someone who's an expert at speaking English, but it also helps to like be able to interact with folks who are kind of in a position similar to yours and learn from them as well. And so it's something we continue to be excited about.
Those experiences should... Yeah, go ahead, Mishti.
I was just going to say, I feel like there's so many mix and match kind of options, and I don't know how you think about these different ones. Like I put in chat, like someone might not mind having a tutor from the Philippines or India versus one from the US, like depending on what their specific goals are. Or like for me personally, some of the best language learning I've gotten is from like kids, because they're kind of at kids who are native speakers of like Spanish, for example, because they're kind of at like not that much higher than my level, not mental at all. So like what are kind of maybe the user to user pairings that people would still pay for and be productive, but aren't involving like the expensive kind of American English tutor. So how do you think about those different connection points and how to build them into the system?
Yeah, totally. No, so I think the kid example is great. I like that, and I like how they're very not judgmental. I have a 1-year-old running around somewhere over there, and I don't think he's judged me once in his entire life. So, but no, that's great. I think the other, I mentioned that like having more students per tutor is one kind of dimension you can go. I think another one is like, can you find lower cost tutors? We've generally steered away from that. Like we've kind of held a really high standard around like native English speakers. Like you grew up speaking English and you're a native speaker. There are a lot of services out there that are kind of the Philippine tutor model.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And I mean, I think what we care about just like delivering you a really, really high quality English education experience. And there are a lot of benefits from learning from a native English speaker. And so, and I think we've kind of built a brand around like Cambly is a place where you go and you talk to native English speakers. Like a lot of other services kind of go down that path. And so I think we've generally kind of stuck to that. So I'm a bit more drawn to the sort of like multiple students angle. And I think actually what you mentioned around learning folks who are maybe a little above you and not judgmental, I think you get some of those benefits from the sort of students in your group as well. But yeah, right now we don't have either. But yeah, I think it's something I'm definitely drawn to.
Yeah, I think it might solve some. I bet there's some behavioral or experience like quirks that may not be visible until it's tried. But like, there's probably a certain type of person who feels a little shy to be in a one-on-one kind of that feels like a stressful situation. Yeah, totally. Whereas if you could be in a 2-on-1. You feel all of a sudden like much less responsible for making the conversation go well, or being, if you're not feeling confident in your English skills, probably being one-on-one can feel stressful compared to being 2-on-1. There's both of us learning together. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of like experience, kind of behavioral and experience things that would surface, if such a thing were possible. I'm excited about that future.
Yeah, the confidence thing is super interesting. I'm glad you brought it up. Like a lot of what happens in Cambly is you just build confidence learning English. Like it's tough to drop into a room with someone who, doesn't speak your language and only speaks English, right? Like that's an inherently like intimidating experience.
Right.
And it's challenging, I think, for people to do that. And it can be a little uncomfortable, right? Like, But I think that feeling is. I like to say that feeling is called learning because like you kind of need to do that in order to actually improve. It's a lot easier to like study from a book, right? It's a lot more comfortable, or kind of flip through flashcards or something like that, right? But if your goal is to learn to speak, you kind of have to do that, and that feeling is. is you kind of breaking out and doing the thing you need to do to actually get better. But yeah, it's a challenge we tackle it, and I think the group setting could be a more comfortable entry point to be able to like there's other folks in the room. It's not just you and one person who speaks perfect English and you. There's other folks who are also on their journey to learning English.
What's the last thing that you felt like a true beginner at, and like how did you approach learning that?
A true beginner, you said?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many things. I mean, I'm a bit of a dabbler. I guess right now I'm definitely a dad beginner. So that's probably like the most top of mind one. But like, I mean, having a kid, one day you have like kind of no responsibility, and then the next day you have like a huge responsibility to keep this small, delicate human alive. And so that's been a crash course, and it keeps changing too, right? Like keeping taking care of a 1-day-old is very different from taking care of a 1-month-old, and very different from taking care of a 1-year-old. And so, although I guess I've been at it now for over a year, I kind of still feel like a beginner every day. So so that's,
how do you go about
top of one?
How do you go about that process? Like, did you start with books or YouTube videos or podcasts, or what's sort of your go-to when you want to learn something new?
A mix of a lot of that stuff, like some books, some podcasts, a lot of learning on the job. If you want to get good at the thing, you got to do the thing. And so, no amount of reading about how to change a diaper while while your subject fights back, will prepare you quite for that. And so I think a lot of it is just kind of on the job learning and kind of figuring it out as you go. Talking to friends, I guess, this can also be helpful. But yeah, I don't know if I have a great trick you haven't heard of yet, but kind of the standard stuff. But a lot of it's just kind of I think learning on the job. Like doing a startup, you know, if you get the advice at the wrong time, it probably just goes in one ear and out the other. But when it's like the thing you're battling with like for the last week, and then you get the advice, it just like it sticks, and you're like, oh my god, this is going to change my life. That is such a good trick. And so,
yeah, I think one of the things maybe Mishti's channeling is there was this tweet we saw yesterday from our friend Linda, who she was suggesting that there should be some sort of a format where you take somebody who has expertise at one thing and you pair them with somebody who has expertise at something totally different, and you see how the person who you think of as an expert kind of graduates up their learning journey from like a total beginner. So that, you know, maybe if you say who's like maybe like Paul Graham is an expert at, you know, investing in startups, but maybe he doesn't know much about, I don't know, skiing or something. So maybe if you were to take him through and teach him how to ski, that would be like help other people see what a naive, you know, fresh eyes look like.
Who are experts at learning? That's kind of what my question gets at when I ask different people, like what's the most recent thing you've been a beginner at? Like, how have you approached that? What kind of principles can you feel off of that into how you learn, and like what practices you implement when you're trying to learn something new?
Yeah, no, I love that. Do you have thoughts on that? Having asked loads of smart people that question, tell me the answer. I'm so curious. I want to be an expert learner.
It actually kind of reminds me of this book, Moonwalking with Einstein, which I read a while ago, but I think, is it by Joshua Safran Foer or Jonathan Safran Foer? They're brothers, I always forget. But it's about this guy training himself to be basically like a world-class memory champion. Here's the book. And the one thing that stuck with me, Josh Foer, from this book was that he talked a lot about how like you have to constantly put yourself in this sweet spot of like being uncomfortable but not so uncomfortable that you quit, but like that is really tricky to always find, because at the beginning you're going to be overshooting a lot. Like you're going to get comfortable with like the first skill that you learn pretty quickly, but how do you continue to like put yourself at that like kind of area of tension? That's how you learn. Was talking, we had this guy Von Tan earlier on Lunchbreak. Here's his Twitter. He was talking about this as well in terms of just like, so he's studied some of the best culinary teams in the world and how they do R&D and how they manufacture these super like high stress environments and create a lot of innovation, and kind of like studying these innovation lab type settings in these kitchens. And one of his things was how do you get people to be comfortable with uncertainty, and like in that pressure cooker situation, like you have to construct exactly the right kinds of pressure cookers, I guess.
Is there a pun intended there with the culinary show and the pressure cookers?
But I mean, because it's so individual to the person and the stage and like exactly what they're learning. I feel like this about surfing right now. So
nice. That's good.
That's my
I mean, we think about these problems a lot at Cambly, right? Because like, you know, we're ultimately trying to help people progress up that curve as fast as possible. And so, you know, what we want to do as a company is build the suite of tools that lets you kind of stay in that like, well, I forget what you called it, uncomfortable tension, right? Like, you know, I think one of the ways you stick with it is if you can see progress. I think that's like one of the most motivating factors for me anytime I'm learning something new. So we think about like, okay, how do we surface the progress you're making on Cambly? So you know that like, this is hard, but I'm actually getting much better. And so we have great qualitative ways to do that right now. Like we record every session, and so you can look at a session on Cambly when you started and kind of how slow and uncomfortable you were and not confident you were, and then you can look a few months later and see how much better you are at the language. You know, I really want to have like a graph that is going up and showing you like quantifying that what exactly is that progress is. I think it's incredibly motivating. Like I said, one-on-one, I think instruction is a good form to like, if you have someone constantly pulling you into that uncomfortable zone, I think it's a good way to stay there as well.
Are there any stats that you think you could pull out? Like, is like number of words spoken per minute, is that kind of thing meaningful, or does that very obviously improve as you improve your success in language?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like cool proxies like that. Like you can look at the speed of speaking. That gives you a sense of like how comfortable and confident you are. You can look at the like diversity of vocabulary that you're using and kind of get an understanding of like what your vocabulary size is.
Right.
A lot of those things actually hinge on having good like voice to text transcription, which is obviously getting better, but it's not perfect. What's interesting about Cambly is our students are all non-native English speakers, and so if you think the voice to text doesn't work that well for you, you can imagine it works a lot worse for someone who's a non-native English speaker. And we record all these conversations on Cambly and have a pretty interesting and maybe one of the largest, if not the largest, data sets in the world around non-native English speakers talking to native English speakers. And so I think one of the things we're excited to do is to kind of build out the machine learning and kind of the algorithms around like, can we track progress better? Can we give you some instant feedback as well on kind of how you're doing? I think there's a lot of for data folks and engineers out there. I think there's a lot of really interesting problems, and I think what's cool about Cambly is we built something that was really useful from day one, and as a result have been able to scale the business quite a bit and gotten a lot of customers that now allows us to, I think, have sort of a very interesting and proprietary data set to build even more cool stuff on top of. It's one of the things that I think excites me about technology is that
super cool.
You can solve a problem for one person using technology, and then it just scales beautifully. And so I think we're really excited about the things we can do in that vein. And highly related to your surfing adventures, Mishti, in a different light.
And I noticed we're actually just 5 minutes left in the hour, and I did want to hear somewhat. I mean, this machine learning kind of data set and feedback loop seems like an awesome problem to solve, and I think that would be a really exciting one that probably, I don't know if you're already working on that or thinking about it in the future, but we'd just love to hear kind of what are some of the big problems that you're working on at Cambly right now, and what does the team look like? What is it going to look like 6 months out? What are you looking to hire for or recruit for?
Yeah. I should have probably opened by saying that we're hiring. We are very actively hiring and looking for talented folks across the board. Investing a lot on growing the engineering team right now, and so if Cambly's mission speaks to you and you're interested in working on a problem that has an impact on a lot of people, I think we would love to talk. To kind of zoom in on the impact side a little, like this is something I think about a lot, and I think about like sort of what is the impact. I think of an impact as sort of what is the impact I can have on one person times how many people can I have that impact on, and this is where technology comes in, is you can scale a lot. And so I very firmly believe that teaching someone English is one of the most impactful things you can do for their life. And then there happen to be 6 million people that have this problem, 1.5 billion that are actively learning it. And I think when you multiply those two numbers, I think that the potential for impact, and not just impact, but positive impact in the world, I think is quite profound. I think it could be hard pressed to find problems of that scale. And I think what's interesting about Cambly is like, we're at an interesting point in our journey where, we are really like breaking out and growing really fast. And so there's also, I think, a lot about the impact of like, as a talented software engineer, if you work at a really small company or work at a really big company, like how does that look? And I think about it, if you work at a big company, you can work on a small problem that services a lot of people, but be a relatively small part of the organization. And if you work at a really, really, really small company, you can have a huge influence on the product or whatever, but you may not have any customers, so your impact is kind of limited there. And ideally, you work on something that's growing really fast, so you have a big influence on the product, but it actually touches a lot of people. And I think we're at an interesting point in our journey where, the thing works, it's growing super fast. We're still pretty early in terms of our team, and so you can have an outsized effect on the trajectory and sort of the product we build, but it'll immediately sort of from day one have a huge impact on people's lives in a really meaningful way. And so, I think that's sort of how I think about both impact from like the problem we're working on, but also from like as an individual engineer, like what can I do if I want to work on a problem that is going to help a lot of people in the world. I think this is a really good one.
The engineering,
go ahead.
I was going to say, the engineering roles kind of are there certain like domain specific requirements, like data people, iOS people, Android people, generalist, full stack, front end, back end? Like what's the flavor of how the team works?
Kind of across the board. Like, we started out the team with a lot of kind of full stack engineers. As we've grown, we've started to hire more kind of specialists as well. And so, we have a mobile app, so looking for great mobile engineers. We have a website, front end engineers as well. Kind of always hiring for back end.
Mobile app is native iOS stuff.
Native
Android.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, native iOS, native Android. Looking for great back-end engineers as well. Like the service is scaling really fast, and so there's a bunch of really interesting scaling challenges. Excited about machine learning as I touched on earlier. We're excited about all the things we can do with our data, but I think even sooner than that, like the matching problem of getting you connected to the right tutor, I think is a really interesting and sort of high leverage thing for us to do really well. And so I think that's something that could have an immediate impact on as well. So I think, I don't know. I didn't pick one of those categories. I maybe picked all of them, but we're kind of hiring across the board and
more of everything.
Looking for folks who I think are excited about what we're doing and our mission. Our mission as a company. I think, like I said, we're a very mission oriented team and sort of very impact driven, and so that's something we care about a lot as well.
Yeah, and what's the team size today?
So we've got about 100 globally, about 30 here in San Francisco, or I guess what used to be San Francisco, and then another 50 internationally in a lot of the markets where we have a lot of customers in. Product team is really small, and so lots of opportunity to have a big impact there. The snapshot today is quite small, but we're actively growing the team, and so we expect to be quite a bit bigger by the end of this year.
Awesome. And are you like time zones, San Francisco only, anywhere?
We're figuring out our coming back to hopefully normal life, and so I think open to remote as well. We're excited to kind of get back into the office and the energy of getting to work together. And so that's something we're looking forward to. But we're, I think, figuring out, I think, how things are going to look in the next few months as things go a bit back to normal. But open to great folks everywhere right now.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, I know we are past the end of the hour that we were going to spend together. So thank you for spending the time with us. Totally love getting to catch up and hear more about kind of what you're up to, state of Cambly and all that.
Yeah, this is super fun.
We'll make some highlights and get stuff out on Twitter.
Yeah, super awesome chat. This is great.
Yeah, this is really, really great to hang with you guys. And thanks again for having me.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Take care. Sir. All right. Bye, guys.
Now we got Tony.
Tony. Welcome, Tony.
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Good, how are you? Yep. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Everything works. I'm impressed. Okay. Thanks so much for having me. I'm not sure what to expect. I am not prepared.
Perfect.
But I'm okay.
That's the only way to be prepared is to not be prepared. So I'll give you, just to diffuse any concerns. This is just, we do this every day. We record a live web video show and we kind of hang out and talk to friends or interesting people. We sometimes read Twitter, we share links and, it's just us having fun.
Okay.
So don't feel you're not under the gun. There's nothing scripted. There's nothing stressful here. But I reached out to Avichal and said, like, who would be interesting to connect with, and your name came up. So and I looked through your background a bit. I saw some healthcare stuff, some government stuff, some
interesting side project. Definitely want to ask you about. Yeah.
It seems like there's just I mean, it all seems like it could be interesting stuff to touch on. And then what we do is we record this. We record it as a published video, but then we also create highlights. And we share those highlights out on Twitter. And so some of the great moments, you tell us a cool story, we turn into a highlight, and then get it out on Twitter.
Okay,
so that's
cool.
That's the general thing, but low stress, unscripted. We'll just
sounds good.
Have fun and hang.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe to kick it off, I think we were originally connected via Avichal. So how are you connected to Avichal?
Yeah, so I'm part of the Southport Commons Founders Fellowship. This inaugural cohort that started. On
so you know our friend Nadia then?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I know Nadia.
Awesome.
Yep.
Great.
I think I saw Nadia posting. I think she might be here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how I know Avichal. And the program has been great so far. It's my background is really technical on the engineering side, and it's kind of helping to round out the picture a little bit more to get me to understand the full the broader scope of what it would take to have a successful startup or business. So It's been great.
Cool. And that's my understanding. I think it's kind of a cohort-based thing. So it kicked off in the last few weeks, and it goes is it a few months total?
Yeah. So it basically it's logically it's like an accelerator. They don't call it an accelerator because it's intentionally not on a fixed time frame. But the idea is, you get funding to pursue your idea or to even develop your idea. And there's like an 8-week kind of curriculum you go through, but you also just have the other fellows that you can get to know, and it's especially nice as a solo founder because it can be lonely as a solo founder. So it kind of gives you a group to bounce ideas off of and commiserate with and stuff like that. So yeah.
So you joined the program already with identified what you wanted to work on, and kind of were you already sort of working with customers or prototype, or what does it look like kind of at the entry point? Yeah,
so Sheet.rocks as it currently stands is, demoable but not usable, if that makes sense. Okay, sure. I mean, I have a lot of the core technology. So Sheet.rocks is a new kind of next generation spreadsheet that I started working on as a quarantine project, and then kind of blossomed into this now full-time job, and potentially going to hire soon as well. But yeah, so the state it's in is it's the core kind of execution engine for Sheet.rocks is pretty well worked out, and it's in a state where you could look at it looks like a spreadsheet, but it doesn't have a lot of spreadsheets are really complicated, so it doesn't have a lot of the things that most people would expect from a full spreadsheet.
Right, and so I'm familiar with spreadsheets that exist in the world, used over the years, many of the different ones, and I wonder, when you look at kind of embarking on a new spreadsheet for the world, is there something in the way that you were using existing systems that wasn't working, or was there a problem you were trying to solve that you just needed a whole new structure? How do you think about sort of the starting point here?
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of came about it from multiple different directions. How I kind of stumbled into it in my own life narrative is, I had always been I'd always kind of had my day job and a side project, and the side projects would all be kind of purely recreational things. And so I had earlier considered, and most of my side projects are not building a whole spreadsheet from scratch. They're it'll be like a little utility or a plugin or, that kind of thing, or even like open source work, just typical side project stuff. But then, so I had earlier done some research into doing a Google Sheets add-on and actually started to build it. And as part of that, I had done kind of market research into how people were trying to push Google Sheets in ways that were kind of unusual or that it wasn't really designed for. So I kind of had that background, and then I decided to not pursue that add-on, and I did something else for a while. But then when the pandemic hit, I decided I thought the pandemic would last like weeks, right? So I was like, oh, okay, I'll do a little side project. So I did, this like reminder bot for Slack. And by the time I finished that, it was like 2 months later, and it was very clear at that point that quarantine was going to be just last forever, right? So I wanted to do something that was, much more ambitious, that would take, at least a year, to kind of get in front of users. And I had kind of already had this background of doing, kind of having done the market research in the spreadsheet world. And I also kind of had a question, which was, partly from that research, but also just from my own curiosity of like, how are spreadsheets so unbelievably slow? And people were like, oh, Excel is fast, or like, no, like Excel's not fast. Like, think of, a spreadsheet, I did a benchmark in Google Sheets. Google Sheets does like, 100,000 calculations a second. And you look at a spec of a processor, and it does, 10 billion floating point operations per second. There's like 6 or 7 orders of magnitude of optimization in there, just in terms of performance. So that was kind of my initial entry point into the world, is like, how can this be so slow? And there's got to be a better way to do it. And then that kind of just blossomed into a whole universe of, okay, well, if you were going to reimagine the spreadsheet in 2021, versus 2005 like Google was doing for Google Sheets, or 1985 like Microsoft was doing for Excel, like basically knowing the way that we understand the world now, and also knowing that spreadsheets are going to continue to be an important part of how people do everything. Like what would you do now differently? So that's kind of the task ahead of me, is like which I think is pretty interesting.
Have you found like a particular, like you mentioned that maybe Excel fails around a certain core set of features. Are there certain things that you're like a use case, maybe to try to empower somebody who's trying to do one of those things? Like, is it kind of use case focused, or do you just have like you mentioned speed as one of the things that you want to improve? Is it kind of a bunch of different?
Yeah,
areas?
So it's a general purpose spreadsheet. So it's it's not, I'm not like, I thought I did research into, maybe I should, like retail investors were one like obvious market. There's like, retail investors are people who kind of recently landed in spreadsheets. They're developing a lot of their own business logic. They have a lot of need for some of the performance. They have a lot of need for integrations. So they're like a fairly big, cohort of people that have fallen into Google Sheets and Excel. Another group is like kind of like internal business applications for like small, like startups, like 5 to 10 person companies, small companies. Like a lot of folks, manage their recruiting, manage their HR systems in Google Sheets, and as they grow, start to exert a lot of feature pressure on those systems.
Right.
So that's another use. But I kind of, the thing that most excites me is, not like, I don't want to build like an HR app or like a retail investment app, right? Like I want to build a general purpose spreadsheet that kind of expands the full. To answer your question another way, like that, having done, spoken with 35 people at least about spreadsheets over the last, month or so since I've been focused on it. There are definitely things, there are definitely trends of multiple people asking for the same thing. But if you take a step back, the real thing is that, there's like a billion people who start off building custom logic and custom business applications spreadsheet, and they basically then want to push it beyond what the spreadsheet's capable of. That kind of, overall, the spreadsheets have just kind of, I would say, largely failed to respond to that feature pressure. And instead, you have basically the software industry is trying to convince people that they don't actually want a spreadsheet. That like, no, you don't want to use a spreadsheet. You want to use this other thing. You want to use this other thing. And now we're kind of, 15 or 20 years into the unbundling of spreadsheets. And it turns out like people actually don't want to use those things. Like now people, I have multiple people who I spoke with who are like, we started off doing this in Google Sheets, and now we have 6 different apps, and none of them talk to each other, and we have to do all these integrations. And by the way, like this system, the way it calls this is, uses a different name than this, and they don't actually, the definitions don't align, and like there's all these problems that have come with the unbundling of spreadsheets. And I won't necessarily say that there's going to be a full rebundling of I don't think you could do a full-fledged payroll or tax system in a spreadsheet, even the one that I'm building. But I think there's a really interesting opportunity to kind of make spreadsheets more powerful and more adaptable and extensible.
Yeah. So there's this
doing those chats with people who had strong opinions on spreadsheets. What are some surprising things that came out of that you hadn't thought of before?
One small thing. So one of the things that a lot of people say is mobile support. Just spreadsheets are not only. I mean, there's like an app, but they're hard to use on a phone in their native form. But even aside from like the fact that it's hard to navigate a spreadsheet, also that usually the apps are like by necessity, like way lower feature set and stuff than the full desktop app. One kind of ingenious thing that I spoke with a spreadsheet enthusiast in Paris who he's like was just really into sorry, I'm mixing up my users here. I spoke with a spreadsheet enthusiast in the U.S. who's in the military, and he's known as like the spreadsheet guy in his platoon or whatever. And he has a fitness app, and he basically just like adjusted all the cells in the spreadsheet to basically fit on his phone. So he basically he made a little mobile UI in the spreadsheet with like a dark theme and everything that he just like squished the cells into the right dimensions. So I thought that was kind of ingenious. I mean, I think people do a lot of business and financial modeling. There's a lot of people who do like their full timekeeping in spreadsheets. So I'm kind of connected with some Google Sheets consultants now who help companies who are have gotten themselves into a spreadsheet pickle, and they one of them, she's had like a dozen different companies come to her and be like, I'm using Google Sheets for time tracking, and I want you to make it mobile friendly or make the data make sense or something like that. So I mean there's a lot of things. Spreadsheets also, spreadsheets also do big things at big companies that you wouldn't expect. Like, there are a bunch of big companies that I spoke with that they asked me not to name them, but the big companies with like thousands, even tens of thousands of employees who manage their headcount in a Google Sheet, because same thing. The unbundling of all this stuff has led them with like 6 different HR systems, and none of them talk to each other, so they all do it in a spreadsheet, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When I hear spreadsheets, I think it's certainly attractive as it's attractive as a builder to be able to build something so horizontal and that can just sort of serve infinite use cases. I mean, we could sort of imagine anything versus building something that's like a specific payroll app, right? But I think there's like a healthy tension that always exists between the horizontality and the potential scale of something and the actual like usefulness, or how do I figure out where to get started. So I wonder if you mentioned like a fitness app, I wonder if it makes sense within Sheet.rocks as a horizontal to actually create and I don't know if market is the right word, but like create the very best fitness experience that can be created on Sheet.rocks and give it to the guy who's trying to do that, and then see if he gives it to a dozen people, and then they learn about the fitness app, but also learn about the platform and maybe another template app that emerges. Maybe somebody builds a payroll app or something. Like, do you think that mechanism of like horizontal, create a vertical, share the vertical, drive toward the vertical use, but discover the horizontal, like as a kind of pattern?
Yeah. So I think that's totally right, and it's it took me a couple weeks to get to that point with the you are now. But basically, if you kind of look at at any given point in time, most software kind of exists on a spectrum from like power to usability, kind of I would say like a continuous line at any given point, and then over a period of decades, maybe we get things that are both more usable, more powerful, and of course, there's always just terrible software at any given time that's bad at both. But good software at any given time kind of maxes out at that, at that along that line, and basically the traditional like software development is really, you have like these developers who demand extreme power. You want a programming language that can, write domain name server or build a React app, or like there's just an unbelievable amount of things that you might want to do. And then on the other hand, you have users who have extreme demand for usability, right? Like if you're a Lyft user or you're ordering from Grubhub, like you want a very narrow scope of what you can do, and you want it to be very easy. And I think spreadsheets are interesting because they're obviously it's a single application, but they're still kind of can be split still into that like developer versus user hat. And you see this sometimes within a single person that, someone kind of puts on their spreadsheet developer hat and they write some formulas or maybe do a macro, and then they consume that spreadsheet, they import data and they analyze it, with their kind of analyst hat. But sometimes these can be completely different people at different companies. There'll be like, the finance department will build a complicated model, and then the CFO will basically consume it. So you're basically you still have the user developer division, but they just both happen to be using the same piece of software. And the way I see Sheet.rocks is basically relative to those two extremes of the spreadsheet and the full custom development. It's kind of giving the kind of spreadsheet developers more tools to both build and extend and monetize their additions to the spreadsheet platform. And then on the other side, having users have more tools at their disposal to consume and hopefully make that easier as well. So
it seems like we're sort of narrowing the gap between what is a developer and a user too, right?
Well, I think I think in a spreadsheet, in a Google Sheets, it's often the same person. In Sheet.rocks, it may still often be the same person, but it could also be, I think of my Google Sheets consultants who I'm working with, like, they might have clients who come to them and say, build me a time tracking app, and with Sheet.rocks, they'd be able to do it in a responsive way with a mobile experience, and like they can't do that with Google Sheets or Excel, maybe data scientists or statisticians who are, doing reports for their CTO or CFO, and they start off in Google Sheets, but with Sheet.rocks, they could actually build a visualization in D3 that would let them visualize their Salesforce across the map of the US or something, right? So kind of like giving them more tools so that the consumers can also have a better experience.
That's really cool. I also wanted to peel back and just ask you how, I saw that you studied physics and then electrical engineering, and how did that even work? Your whole journey into sort of data science side projects and now what you're up to now?
Yeah.
You did that when you were in college.
Yeah, I started off just I just always thought I still love physics. Physics is super deep. And super fascinating. I've recently gotten into astrophotography too, which is super fun.
Oh wow!
So from really starting in physics, I was starting in high school. I started to really love physics, and in college, there was like a physics and philosophy major that my college had, and it turned out I ended up being terrible at philosophy, and I found that the physics people had better philosophy ideas than the philosophy people. So anyway, I went into physics, so I majored in that undergrad. And then I'd always had kind of been tinkering. I built robots and had remote control airplane hobby as a kid. And then in college, I kind of went into experimental physics. And it was really the first time I felt like I was actually good at something. Physics it was hard for me, and especially once it got more theoretical, it was really hard. And I could do it, but it was challenging. And then the experimental stuff was, right up my alley. I could, spend hours in the lab fussing with lasers and stuff. I actually got shot in the eye with a laser.
I saw it on your website.
Yeah. We were doing like, like collimation of a pulse laser and accidentally shot into our eyes. Yeah, we had goggles on. It was fine, but your eyes kind of starts to ache, and you're like, why is my eye? Because it's invisible, right? Your eyes aching. You're like, why is my eye aching? It's like, oh, right. There's like a huge laser that's getting my eye. But anyway, yeah, I love tinkering around before we move on, that same laser, I accidentally focused it. And it turns out when you focus like in the air, like not in a vacuum, when you focus like a really powerful pulse laser in the air, it actually like ionizes. It basically creates a little ball of lightning in the air because it basically strips the electrons like off of the atoms and just like makes a little fireball in the air. But anyway, so you could see why I love physics. It's like really, really crazy stuff.
Fireballs in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so after school, I kind of was thinking of either going to grad school or doing something else, and I ended up doing something else. I was working for a startup. I was very excited about green tech. This was during like the green tech hype cycle in Silicon Valley. So I went to the Bay Area for a couple years. Worked at this thin film solar cell startup that is that is now bust, along with a lot of the other folks from that thin film hype cycle. That did not work out well for a lot of folks, but yeah. But it was interesting about that. So I started off basically building instrumentation for them. Because that was kind of what I trained for with the experimental physics, and then I would build an instrument for them and be like, "Oh, cool!" But like, we can't use this because it has no software. So I kind of like learned to write software on the job at that company, and I really loved it, and it kind of clicked with me. And I went back to grad school, and after a little bit of back and forth, decided to basically focus on software in grad school. This was before boot camp, so I just like bought the undergrad textbooks for I was like, I'll just buy the undergrad textbooks, and I read them, and that was enough to do like the software classes in grad school. In grad school, I worked as I got a job working at a very small early stage company doing hurricane prediction. This was like during the very beginning of like the big data hype cycle. And so we were like, whoa, we'll use like big data to predict hurricanes. We got pretty far, and then the company itself got hit by Hurricane Sandy. So we could not continue. We had to close down shop because we did not failed to predict the hurricane that took us down. But yeah, so that's kind of, I kind of had gotten enough experience in grad school and through freelancing and stuff to get a full-time job. I worked at a management consulting company in like their software, division for about 2 years. Basically, during that time, I kind of started on the side projects, which I continue today, and was doing like civic tech side projects while I was there. I had a long commute, so I had a lot of time to do them. And then,
how does a side project get started in your mind? Is it just like a little itch you want to scratch, or you're debating something with some friends and you want to prove a concept, or how does it work?
Oh, it's just like pure I wonder what would happen if, like, most of my side projects are not it was only relatively recently that, I mean, even today, like, I'm more driven by curiosity than anything else, and like, I think that the problem, like, my perspective on the side projects really shifted from like purely technical curiosity, like what would happen if I built this machine learning model that analyzed this data, and then or whatever. And then gradually I'd still curiosity, but my curiosity really shifted to because at some level, like, you kind of max out on the technical stuff. Like, I'm not say there's not that much that I would be like, oh, I wonder if I could implement this or that. And like, the real challenge for any software is not like whether or not it's possible. I mean, there's things for like extreme, algorithmic work for machine learning and stuff that, of course, is intellectually challenging. But most software that gets written is not. At the end of the day, it's not like technically that amazing. But the real challenge for software is not like how do you write it, or not even how do you get it to be functional, but like how do you actually make it useful? Because it turns out it's really, really hard to get a piece of ionized sand to be useful to people in their actual lives. So that my kind of curiosity shifted to like what could you write in software that would actually be useful, so my side project started then, and I got into, I ended up getting into GovTech based off the side projects, and I had a 5-year career in GovTech, and now I'm kind of now I have my side projects have shifted into my full-time career now, which is really cool.
Yeah. Well, on the side projects, you say you want to find something that's useful, and I think it's a great framing and it's a tough lesson that a lot of people, have like some battle scars from trying to do things that aren't useful. And I wonder about process of identifying what's useful, because it seems like there's a few credible ways that people have proposed. I think Steve Blank is famous for this kind of customer development framework, and that's maybe a little more enterprise software oriented. And it looks like the kinds of things you've done look like kind of they wouldn't be the appropriate thing for like a customer development process, but maybe you had a problem yourself, or maybe somebody was complaining about something. Like when I look at your page of projects, like remind us, advanced reminders for Slack teams. So were you on a Slack and it was painful for you, or did somebody point out that they needed something like this, or sort of what's the process for this thing to come into existence?
Yeah, so that one was definitely a pain point that I felt personally. Most of my recent side projects are things that I actually, really, basically all of them in the last, at least 4 or 5 years have just been all things that either I personally wanted or I was personally just felt should exist in the world. Definitely, I'm definitely not an expert on building products that people, will for sure love. Like my batting average is like not that great, but I definitely build things that I love. I guess some of my apps that do okay, but So for Remind Us, I think Remind Us has like 1,000 teams using it now, but like basically nobody's paying me for it, which is fine. But I felt the need for I was managing a team of 50 engineers at the time, and 40 or 50, and basically it's like kind of the realization that a reminder in a group setting is not a one-time thing. It's basically like a whole workflow where like it could be something like the example I have on the website is like time cards, right? Like, okay, you want everyone to fill out their time cards by a certain time. So like naively, like before going into management, you might think like, oh, like I'll email everyone and then people will always do it forever. And of course that is not true, right? So basically for every instance of this thing, you have to let people know that it's going to happen. You have to let them know that, at least one time, sometimes multiple times, you have to let them know that it's the actual due date. And then you have to follow up with the people who did not do it. So basically, Remind Us is a way to basically, within Slack, like automate that entire workflow. So it's kind of like a souped up version of the built-in reminder Slack. And it also just has like things that should really be in the default version, like advanced recurring reminders. So you can say like, you can have a reminder format that's like, do this every month on the 15th, unless it's a weekend. In that case, do it on the Friday before, like stuff like that is handy.
So now that you've told me this, I have to ask you, why is this not your business?
Well, Remind Us is not. First of all, it's finished. So like, I mean, I could.
It's software, so it's never finished, right?
Well, the Remind Us and a lot of the other apps I built, they're really pretty narrowly scoped. So, if you're, another one, the one that I have that is actually, actually has a lot of people using it is PeakLink, which is like a link sharing tool. It's basically like, it provides a shortened link, but it also lets you customize like the link preview that shows up on social media.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's doing like 4 million links a month now with about 10,000-20,000 users who are using it. But like even that, like, first of all, I'm not that excited about it. I'm not that curious about it anymore, and I also don't think either that or Remind Us is venture backable. Not to say that venture backable should necessarily be the goal of things, but like to answer your question of like why I'm not doing it full time, it's like, well, it's like I kind of felt like I did what I wanted to do with it. And I would put that in stark contrast to Sheet.rocks, where I didn't start off imagining Sheet.rocks as a venture backable thing. I wanted to build it, but then it became very obvious that like, okay, well, like I can't do this. I can't build a whole spreadsheet like while I'm watching Netflix in like the hour a day I have. Like it would take me 20 years. So it was the only feasible way. The only feasible way to actually do it would be, to build a team and to have at least me do full time on it.
But I'm wondering, Remind Us. I understand, in one sense it's done because it kind of accomplishes the task end to end that you imagine. But in another sense, like all of software could, bleed into other use cases. And if there's people who actively use it every day, there's some energy around that. And I wonder, because when I hear the problem you're talking about, it sounds to me like some sort of, generalized collaborative workflow problem, which in fact is probably what people use spreadsheets for a lot. So, I'm just an outsider, so take this as fresh eyes, but it almost seems to me like you're building this very horizontal Sheet.rocks, but then Remind Us is almost like a too vertical to be worth your time to invest in more heavily. But is that actually like the entry point to help people customize Remind Us using some of the features of like a Sheet.rocks? Like, I don't know exactly what it is, but is there some sort of interesting way that there's give and take, or that they can pair to help take the use case of Remind Us and expand it and help it sort of expand to give Sheet.rocks some initial use cases?
Yeah, I'm just not curious about Remind Us anymore. If people, I kind of, for one thing, it's just, I'm not, for something that is a full company, I'd be nervous about being so dependent on the Slack ecosystem or any ecosystem. Any kind of platform. I think platform risk is a real thing. I've been burned by Google a few times in different ways, having too heavy integrations there. I don't know. I'm just not that curious about it anymore. I did my thing with that, and some people use it, and I think maybe I would be more curious if I was getting $1,000 a month from it, but basically what I'm seeing is, there's like a thousand teams use it, but it's like one or two people will download it and use it, and it's just like it's not really spreading within the organization. The kind of, it's like a freemium level where the first 3 people in an organization are free, and then beyond that it's like it's per seat pricing. So maybe if I were getting revenue from it, I would like think, but like it's just not like it's. I don't know. I don't want to invest too much.
That's really important too, because I was just struck by the depth of each of these side projects, but like actually having the self-awareness to be like, how much do I care about this at this point? Like, what am I really curious about? And then like following your nose into like what's the intersection of useful for the world and super personally like intriguing to you. I think, isn't that the ideal kind of founder mentality for anything? So I really like the iteration and just like open exploration that you seem to have done across all of these different areas. And I'm also actually like curious about what you are super curious about today, aside from including the Sheet.rocks stuff, but also if there's other stuff, like if you had unlimited hours, what kind of questions would you be pressing on, or what data sets would you be looking at and organizing today?
I'm I'm pretty much one track mind for spreadsheets these days. I think there's plenty to sink my teeth into there that keeps me interested, and I think we'll do so for a long time. I mean, in the back of my mind, I kind of like I use I think this is like the classic developer thing, but I use to-do lists for everything. And I think it actually, I just saw a thing that maybe this is what Asana is. Maybe I should just download Asana. But I was thinking of like, I thought it would be helpful to have some kind of like team-based to-do list. Maybe that is what Asana is. But yeah, I mean, that's just a whim. I mean, I'm kind of all in on spreadsheets for the foreseeable future. I am, but in terms of other random things, I am excited. I got a new like thermoelectric cooled camera, and I'm gonna hopefully start taking pictures of galaxies once the weather clears up in Chicago.
Whoa!
It says thermoelectric.
Oh, what does that mean? How does that work?
Yeah, so basically, a lot of what determines like the sensitivity of a camera is when you like amplify. It's like really easy to amplify. Signal off of the pixels, but what's hard is keeping the noise low, because usually, like for a normal camera, you can amplify it a lot, but then you just get a really noisy image. So a thermoelectric cooled camera is like a special astrophotography camera where like they have a little thermoelectric cooler built in that like cools it down to like 30 Celsius below ambient. And basically that means like it's very cold, which means you have very low thermal noise, which is a big contributor of noise. So you just get like really, really clear low noise images from that kind of camera.
And that's particularly is it astrophotography that's particularly like you need to get that sensitivity?
That's where it's really helped. I mean, I have like an old DSLR that I use as well. But the really like wowza stuff you kind of need some. Well, I wouldn't say need. It's nice. It's fun to have kind of cool fancy equipment for to get the really more distant objects.
And is that something like you're leaving it on a really long exposure, or you have like it's usually not. You could leave it on sometimes people do a couple minutes. I think like if you have the gain high and you have low noise, you can often get like good images in a couple seconds. 5 to 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And is this a hobby that you sort of picked up recently, or is this something that you've sort of been pursuing ever since, I guess, you're sort of studying physics and interested?
Yeah, well, kind of both, actually. I have my grandfather started to get into it during his retirement, and then died before he could like really explore the hobby. So I inherited his telescope, and I used it a little bit when I was a teenager. But then basically in the last 6 months, I kind of like rediscovered it. Got part of the whole quarantine thing. I think a lot of people have gotten into astrophotography for that reason. I basically I kind of got it working again, and there's like one kind of cable that I bought that was like only made in 1985 that I had to track down from eBay. So I kind of like got that working, and kind of have now gone really full into the hobby. But yeah,
that's really cool. Tangentially, another thing I did want to ask about is sort of the interplay between kind of process and team management learnings that you've had from the government and also being in the tech space. I saw some tweets that you'd made about like government transparency and pay raises and promotions being like a really great feature. And then I'm sure you also have thoughts on just the management culture and other things. Like, what do you think is underrated about the way that the government organizations function? And also, if you could make kind of tweaks now, having seen like multiple worlds, what would those be?
Oh, I love this question. So, I mean, I would say one thing that that I always thought about, and it's really interesting to me about this thing is, like day to day as a software engineer, if you're on like if you're with a good contractor or within one of the good digital service teams, or versus like working at a tech company, there's not a huge difference. I mean, you have technical work to do. You make a stupid mistake, you hit your head on the table. Somebody's saying, "Why isn't this done?" Usually, it's kind of like pretty similar, which kind of makes you think that they are similar things. But when you take a step back, they're actually almost completely opposite, in the sense that pursuing something like Sheet.rocks or Remind Us or PeakLink, you're basically targeting so that, and this is true, you might advertise it to 10,000 people. If you can get, 10 of those people paying you, then it could be a successful, day or successful quarter or whatever, depending on how much it pay you. But, basically you can cast a wide net and you are trying to catch a few fish, and you truly do not care about the people who hate your product, ignore it, don't use it. So you're kind of going from, you really only care if like maybe 1% of the people who are exposed to it, if they become, evangelists and diehards, and like that's enough to build a company off of. In government, it's basically almost the complete, reverse exposure of that same thing. So in government, you're basically guaranteed product market fit, right? Like a lot of time you're literally giving away money. In our case, I'm working for healthcare.gov. Like we were trying to give people access to healthcare. There's basically zero risk that like people like won't want your service or won't think it's useful. And basically the problem is in government that, if 1% of people can't use your product or do have an issue, then it's like the end of the world, and it ends up on New York Times, and Washington Post is tweeting about you, and people are furious. And this came. So it's a really interesting space. It's really interesting to kind of have exposure to both worlds, because in a lot of ways, government is kind of like high altitude training for normal software development, because it's like you have to care so much about like every user, because every user could turn into an angry email, an angry tweet, a letter to the editor, and in a way like every user has already paid for your product involuntarily, so they have a right to be angry if it doesn't work. But I was in involved in email chains within the federal government, where we had like really high up people in the government, like directors, that kind of people involved with like trying to figure out why a single user couldn't get access to healthcare.gov, right? Like this is like 20, 30 people in an email chain, like trying to figure out like an edge case for one user who was just like a guy in Missouri who couldn't access healthcare.gov, right? And like that's the kind of thing that like you generally like that would never make sense to do at a profit-driven company. But it's also it's an interesting exercise. I mean, there's some more stuff. We could do a whole hour just on this, but the government is organizationally really complicated, and corporations are mostly miniature dictatorships, right? And of course, it doesn't matter, if a corporation fails, nobody cares. But if a government fails, a lot of people care, and it's kind of the end of society, that society. So you kind of have the situation where you have an organization that's very complicated, and part of the reason it's complicated is because it has a lot of checks and balances, and a lot of when I was at 18F, we were pioneering some things, and like a couple months later there were like 3 different auditors that like came in and like scolded us for doing things in a certain way, and you would never see that at like a startup who is doing innovative work, right? But like you have that in government because there's all these different people whose jobs it is to peek into what you're doing and make sure that it's not wasting money, make sure that it's done according to some standards, stuff like that. But that organizational complexity, it's a really difficult environment to innovate in. And I often, pitching people to join government, which I used to do a lot successfully, and I would still encourage people to join. I think it's wonderful to get exposure to government work, but you're really you're like you're really, the whole game of government is you have to be excited about innovating within fairly serious constraints, right? And those constraints can be, other organizations that are demanding things that can be done in a certain way. A really obvious one is like security and compliance. Like, oh, cool, you want to ship an app? Like, okay, fill out, this authority to operate. And by the way, it has like 750 controls on it, and like here's all the things that you need to do. It's like the checklist, the kind of checklists that you have in government are unbelievable. So yeah, you have to be really excited about innovating within extreme constraints. If you work in government, which is cool.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there are things that you've seen kind of from how things, I guess like there's a bunch of trade-offs to kind of managing toward a few happy users and letting people who don't care just go away, which is kind of the commercial thing, versus government where you're trying to manage toward kind of the happiness or at least kind of sufficiency for every person who could be a candidate user. And I wonder, when it comes to the details of day-to-day software development or kind of the actual kind of, call it the creative process, how does that look or feel that might be surprising to, I mean, many of us have never spent any time in government. Is it like, are there different tools or processes? Is it more spec driven maybe than ad hoc? Is it these sign off layers and checks and stuff that you mentioned? Or?
Yeah. So most a lot of government agencies, and working for Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they do a great job. I mean, they mostly adopted modern agile methodologies. They have like their enterprise friendly version of agile, which is called SAFe. But people always complain about SAFe because it kind of takes agile, which is by definition like low process and simple, and kind of adds a bunch of rules to it. But overall, I feel like they hit the core points. And it's there's 2 week sprints. There's you have scoping work, you have retros, all the normal agile stuff. There's flexibility for maybe small teams don't do retros, or there's at least in my ecosystem there was plenty of room for sensible variation and a reasonable appetite for kind of technical exploration. I think we just as I was leaving, they were launching a new thing that was using GraphQL, which was towards the newer side of things. So yeah, that's good. I think the thing, I'll say that the good thing that would surprise, I think, people coming from the private sector into the government is, you ship some minor bug fix. Like we had one of the big projects while I was the engineer lead for the healthcare.gov one of the healthcare.gov contracts was basically redoing like the application process. So like when you're applying for healthcare, that kind of application, like basically redoing that application. And there was last open enrollment, there was a big effort to reduce bugs, these edge cases. And they closed like 20-30 bugs in one sprint, and it brought the error rate from like something like 0.3% to 0.1% or something, maybe not even that big numbers, but that tiny fraction, like we did the math and it was like 50,000-60,000 people that would be like would be able to get access to healthcare versus like getting a big red box and having to call the call center and stuff. So I think the kind of cool stuff that you get is everyone is like, people generally don't go into government because like they want to cash out, right? Like they want to build software that's useful. They want to support the mission that that the government takes. So you get a very cooperative atmosphere there, which is great to work in. And then like when you actually deliver stuff, just the scale that you deliver it is really impressive. And sure, like big tech companies have a lot of people using it, but the services that government offers, they really are special, and it feels different to give someone access to healthcare than it does to serve someone 100 ads. So I think that's a very positive thing. On the negative surprises, I would say the thing that tended to really sting people in an unpleasant way is the kind of like out of the woodwork effect with maybe sometimes a big deliverable or something like that. But there's a thing that is, I guess it probably happens in other big organizations too. But you might have like a dozen different offices and agencies, and there's like your security team, and then there's the security team's contractor, and then there's these other directors, and like when you have something that you want to ship that involves a lot of people, there's a couple times there'll be a thing where like you're like, okay, cool, so like we're gonna push it to prod next week, and then like someone will just like pop out of the woodwork and say like, but like what about your session management, or like just something, and it's like, and they will actually often have enough weight, like it's kind of like it's kind of like there's like 50 different people who have an abort button, right? Like they're just all looking at that big red button, and it's all they can do in the room is look at that big red button. Like somebody's going to push it, because that's kind of like what they get excited about. But so yeah, I think like that's a tough thing is, and it's often with like security compliance stuff. Sometimes infrastructure changes, stuff like that is a lot harder to do in the government, and mostly because of this organizational problem that you just have a big organization, and there's a lot of nobody's really in charge. I mean, there's at some point somebody's in charge, but that person's in charge of like 2 million people or something, so they're not really in charge, right? So mostly operationally you're dealing with like in this very multipolar world, and sometimes just people pop out with surprises.
Does it tend to be that the personality types, I mean, you mentioned it being kind of maybe more collaborative, I forget if that was the word used, but maybe than you might expect in sort of a private corporation. But I wonder, are there, I think whenever humans gather, there's oftentimes games that people play, and there's, different styles of how people interact. Is there a lot of like agency versus agency, I don't know, grandstanding or status assertion, and does that bleed into the work, or within a given team do things tend to kind of, because of the collaborative nature that you pointed out, things tend to be kind of a happier, friendlier place than maybe an outsider might imagine?
Yeah, it's I would definitely not describe it as a contentious environment, but that doesn't mean that there's not conflict. I think that the key thing is like almost always when there's people butting heads, it's not because of grandstanding or somebody's ego getting away. It's because like they legitimately have a different mission, and those missions actually conflict. I mean, the obvious thing there is like if you have kind of a product team who wants to ship new features and a security team who wants to not ship any bugs, like security team is always going to want to lock down that release and close down the package management tool and all that stuff. So you get those and those tensions exist in the private sector too. But yeah, I mean, mostly people are very good-willed and really trying to fulfill the mission of their office or the government overall. It's just that there's a lot of them, and they all have a lot of missions, and you kind of throw it all up in the air, and you're going to get a lot of a reasonable amount of time. You're going to get people at with funny crossroads and stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely didn't find any very, very little exposure to like true like bad actors or people. I would also say like people work really hard. I mean, yeah, like the typical thing in government is like, people have like 2 or 3, 4 jobs at the same time because, they'll kind of start off doing one job and then like the government scope will grow and like, oh, now you're managing these other 2 things. But like in the private sector, you would like maybe hire another person for that, but like that's really complicated in government. So basically the demands of government generally outstrip the budget of government. So you end up with, especially folks on the government side, being really, really busy, really, really stressed out. It's like a pretty fast-paced environment, to be honest. A lot of people from 18F are like, basically we're like, I'm too tired and burnt out from my government phase. Let me like retire to one of the big tech companies.
Yeah. Well, kind of to the point of, and I know we're drawing close to the hour, but to the point of you mentioned like people trying to figure out their missions, and you personally having been through so many different spaces. One tweet that I was struck by here, I wanted to ask you about. You said that the biggest challenges in my life have come from me trying to follow someone else's script. How has that manifested, and how have you thought about just, like approaching the world and following your curiosity and like figuring out your personal mission throughout these different things you've done?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that you went through my Twitter threads. I feel like nobody ever reads my tweets. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is, I have two beautiful boys now. They're 3 and 5, and we go on kind of like an adventure every day. And here in Chicago, we have access to beaches. So we would go to the beach, and they do sandcastles, and they run around and throw rocks and stuff like that. The one thing that I always think about is like that kind of like zeal with which a child or maybe a grown-up who loves sandcastles, but that idea of like a kid will just like build a really cool sandcastle and just be really excited about it. And you can like explain to them how the tides work and like all that. Like this thing is not going to last. Like it doesn't really matter to them. And like that's a lot
very in the moment.
Yeah, that's a lot of how I approach my work. And partly to your question about Remind Us, it's like I have very little emotional attachment to the stuff that I built. And not like it's kind of like I love it in the moment. I want to build it. I want it to be useful. But like if it's not, I'm like, okay, cool. Like next sandcastle. Like let's go to the next thing. And I think kind of being at peace with that has made me really happy, because I've been building these things for a long time, and since like I think 2012 was my first like real side project, and it's kind of like they're not all going to be other people won't necessarily like or even use any of them or all of them, and you kind of have to be at peace with like I'll just like one app that I built was just like a called Rauschenberg.app. Rauschenberg was one of the famous painters who like would build like a white canvas and like sold it, and people were outraged, like how can you paint a white canvas and sell it? So I made like a HTML app that's just like a blank body and called it Rauschenberg. But like just dumb stuff like that, that's like, this is entertaining for me, and you kind of have to be at peace with doing dumb things and being a doofus.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love the sandcastle metaphor. I'm going to try to remind myself of that. But, yeah, what a great way to just think about like finding where we each have energy and harnessing that, and not overthinking to the point where we stifle like that creativity in the first place.
Yeah. What a great takeaway.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know we've come up on the hour. Still endlessly fascinated by all these projects you've done, but super happy about the chance to talk about some of them.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was really fun.
Thanks for coming to hang.
Yeah, thanks.